Hi guys, this is Andrew with rockclass101.com and welcome to live lesson episode number. So I wanted to let you guys know that every second Monday of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be live streaming a lesson over at rockclass101.com. Now these live lessons are going to be hosted by Matt Dahlberg, and each month the topic will be different. So what's fun about the live lessons is that you're not only able to watch live, but you're also able to chat live. So you'll be able to chat with Matt and other Rock Class 101 members. So for more information on how to tune in, click this link right here or go to the site rockclass101.com and do a search for live lessons. Now on that page you'll also be able to watch every live lesson that we've done before. So if you've ever missed one, no worries, they're all there. Now, if you can't make the live stream, don't sweat it, because the day after the broadcast, we'll be publishing it to our YouTube channel. And to go one step further, on the first Monday of the month, which is 1 week before the broadcast, we're going to have a forum post up on the site, which will cover two things. Number one, what the topic for the month's live lesson will be about. And number two, you'll be able to post your questions ahead of time. So that's great news because you're still going to be able to participate. Now to post on our forum, all you have to do is sign up for basic membership, which is 100% free, and that will gain you the ability to post on our forums. All right, guys, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Matt to teach this month's lesson, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
So today we're going to talk about sustain. And most importantly, when we're playing sort of solo instrumentals, is how we can finger chords to allow ourselves to still have the melody notes continue to sustain. So for this, we're going to use Toss a Coin to Your Witcher as an example, which is a brand new lesson here on Rock Class based on the Netflix show. And we're going to be talking about a couple bars in particular. Now, if you're just watching this for the first time and you haven't seen any of these live lessons before, definitely check out last week's episode because we talked about the best way to sort of finger chords, and that's going to be something that comes up here today. So check that out if you haven't already. But let's go ahead and talk about sustain. What is sustain? Well, sustain is how long a note rings, essentially. So when we're playing something, sustain is how long we let that something ring out. And it's a really important concept to taking your playing from more of a beginning level to a more advanced level, because honestly, it's one of the biggest things that impact tone. And when you listen to somebody and you think, wow, they sound great, it's usually because they're really good with sustain. So when we're playing a chord melody, we're playing both the melody and the chords at the same time. The chords are also called the harmony. And a common problem people have is that they give every single note in their chord melody equal measurement, where they pick out each one. So for an example here, if I played, measure 7 on a Toss a Coin to Your Witcher, but I didn't think about the sustain of notes at all, I might play it something like this. Technically, I'm playing the right notes, and I'm playing the right notes at the right times, but it sounds terrible, doesn't it? Right? And the reason is because I'm not allowing those notes to sustain as I go through. So specifically with this song, with Toss a Coin to Your Witcher, starting right at the beginning, we can see that we have a chord played, and then we have these melody notes played. Now we want to let this chord ring for that full beat that the quarter note is written for before we relieve any sort of pressure. So if you play that chord and you immediately take the fingers off, you're no longer playing a quarter note, you're playing something much less. So if we think 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, you hear that I'm letting that chord ring through the whole beat, right? And as I go through the rest of the intro here, you'll hear that I'm letting those notes ring for at least the value that they're played at. Now, as we jump ahead a little bit, so as I play through measure 5 and 6 here, it really starts to come out on measure 7. Because when we're here at measure 7, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be playing the melody and the harmony at the same time and kind of layering them together. Sometimes with a chord melody, we literally just play a chord with the melody notes at the same time. In this case, we're going to be picking something that's harmony while also picking the melody. Sort of like if you listen to the original song, it's a lute that's being played while a vocalist is singing it. Well, we're singing and playing the lute on just the ukulele. So this introduces a concept of letting notes ring. So when I start at measure 7 and I play the 4 on the C string, I'm going to let that note ring until it naturally decays and goes away. And the next note there, the 2 on the A, I'm going to let that note ring until I either have to move it or it naturally goes away. So when I start the measure 7 here, I go, I really want to make sure that I'm playing those notes to really ring out as I go through. So as I go through, those are going to be harmony notes, with then the first melody note being this open A. And while that open A is played, I'm playing the 4 on the C. So I'm going to let those two notes ring, and then I'm going to play the other melody notes here, letting them each ring. You'll notice this ring finger doesn't come off the C string just because I'm done playing the 4 on the C. It stays on to make sure that that note continues to resonate and sustain. So with measure 7, and as I go into measure 8, you see the same concept is used. When I play like the 1 and the 0, for instance, and then I play the 2 on the A, I don't take the 1 off just because I added the 2. That would be silly. Now, if I took the 1 off, it would sound like this. You'll hear that note is no longer sustaining, and it makes my arrangement sound quite poor. So measure 8 with this. When I go to the open A, though, I have to take the 2 off because I have to. I can't play 2 notes at the same time on the same string, right? So in that case, I am going to take the note away. And that's what's important, is knowing that you want notes to sustain until, they naturally decay, or until you have to take the hand away. So when we're going through, now this is one of my favorite. There's 2 main favorite parts that I'm going to be working on here with you guys. This first one's on measure 9, and it's specifically the very last note of measure 9. The very last note of measure 9 is this G note. And it's only an 8th note, so you'd think it would just need to be played, on the and of 4, so and stop. But that's not quite right, because that 8th note G is a melody note that's actually going to carry over all the way through the next measure until a new melody note comes about. So when playing this arrangement, when you get to measure 9 and you play that last note, you have to make sure that you play it and let it ring while you do everything else. So if I play through measure 9, it should sound something like this. Right? You can hear that 0 on the G ring and resonate and, continue to just stay there while these harmony notes are coming into play. And that's what makes this sound really cool. It's what made this arrangement sort of work. And the most important illustration of this sustain comes on measure 10. On measure 10, the very last note of this is the 2 on the A, which is a B note. Now, the significance of this note is, even though it's only written as an 8th note at the end of measure 10, it is actually going to resonate through the entirety of measure 11, or hopefully, that's the goal, while the notes that are played on measure 11 give it some harmony. And this is so much fun to play when you get it right, because it almost sounds like a magic trick, because the melody comes a little early and then the harmony comes later, but they're both ringing at the same time. That's all thanks to the sustain. So the goal now is at the end of measure 10 to play 2 on the A, let it ring for the full beats on measure 11. And you'll see there's a problem with this, is if I play 2 on the A with my middle finger, and then I look at measure 11, well, now I need to play 2 on the G and 1 on the C. And that means I'm going to move my middle finger. And that's a problem, right? Because if I have to move the finger, the note can't resonate anymore. So this is where last week's lesson really comes into play, is making sure that we're efficiently fingering this and using the best fingers for the job, because it's so important to allow that note to sustain through the next measure. So what we're going to do is to play the 2 on the A, the very last note. Even though it doesn't seem that important because it's that melody note, we're going to use our ring finger so that we can leave the pressure on while we place our middle finger here on the 2nd fret of the G string and our index finger here on the 1st fret of the C string. And so here's what measure 10 sounds like when played correctly, nice and slow. So you can hear that 2 on the A. Is it ringing by the end of measure 11? Well, not quite. Ukuleles can't actually ring that long. It's one of the big weaknesses of the instrument, but it rings as long as it can, and that's what makes it sound really nice. For reference, if I played measure 10 into measure 11 and didn't take into consideration the sustain of that melody note, it would sound something like this. And you hear that note isn't ringing at all, right? One more time without the sustain. Doesn't sound nearly as good as with the sustain. Just so much better. So now that you can hear it, I'm going to play measures 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. First with sustain. So what I'm doing there is I'm leaving the fingers on, letting the notes ring, making sure that the fingerings I use can allow those notes to breathe. And then I'm going to play those measures again without sustain, meaning I'm going to be moving my fingers early and chopping up that so that you can hear the difference. And I'll play it with sustain again so that you can hear how much better it sounds with it. So something like this. So here's with sustain the first time. Without sustain, and listen how much more novice this sounds, more beginner. Hear how clunky that is? The only difference there, I'm playing the notes in the same time. The difference is that I'm bringing those fingers off when I don't need to. So to make it sound really great, to get the sound that we're striving for with the sustain, we want to leave the fingers on. And again, that sounds something like this. Really, really pretty, right? Another thing that goes with this is playing with the dynamics, and that's a big deal with sustain, is making sure that your melody notes are played much more loudly and prominently and your harmony notes are more withdrawn. It can be really difficult with a song like this because how do you know what a melody note is and how do you know what a harmony note is? And that's where watching the tutorial can help, where, usually the teacher will talk a little bit about which notes are more important as melody notes. But it's also, most importantly, just familiarity with the song. Listening to the original track over and over and over. In this case, putting on Netflix and just rewinding that scene over and over so that you can hear what this song should sound like. Because as I'm playing this, I'm thinking of the song that's sang versus the picking on the lute as two different things. And I'm playing the parts that are going to be, melodic, more loud, more prominent, with more sustain, and the parts that are harmonic, a little bit softer. So let me see what sort of questions have popped up here, or comments. I've seen some pop up on the screen, but I want to make sure I'm looking at here. Zill says, hi, sorry I'm late, almost forgot. No worries, glad you made it. And rewind is always a function with this. And it looks like Zill also says, yep, that sounds like me. So yeah, it's so common when we're learning, and it's because we can play the notes correctly, but that doesn't mean they're the best way to play them, right? You know what I mean? It's one thing to play a note in time. It's a whole nother thing to make sure that you're playing the note well in time. And so practice leaving those fingers on, and that will help immensely. Connie says, I unintentionally cut off sustain when I touch the string too soon trying to get to the next note on the same string, especially in fast sequences. Yeah, it's very common. And one thing that you want to work on is just practicing at a speed that's slow enough that you can do everything correctly. This is especially difficult with sustain because sustain doesn't care how fast or slow you're playing, it only has so much of it. So if you're playing something really slow and the sustain doesn't last until the next note, that's just a side effect of playing something slow. So trusting that when you bring up the speed that you'll be able to have that sustain will be there. It's just, it's kind of like riding a bike. You can't really do it slow. You have to do it, kind of fast. In the case of sustain, we need that note to be ringing because it's a finite amount that it will ring. If you find that you're, touching the string with your right hand or your fretting hand or your picking hand, diagnose which one is the culprit so that you can try to work on not having that finger touch. Generally speaking, what I like to do is, if I'm going to be playing a note, I have the finger come on and then immediately plucked. It is a little bit earlier with the fret than it is with the pluck, but not by much. It's almost simultaneous. So Connie says, I've heard you mention it as choking the note. Yeah, that's a great phrase, especially because sometimes you want to choke the note. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment when we don't want sustain. But we want to try, especially with this tune, try to avoid choking the note, which ironically, we choke the note by unpushing on it, right? If we're holding a chord, the way we choke the note is release the pressure. So hold that pressure the whole way through to keep that going. Zill says, I have a slow, clunky chord change, so I lose sustain trying to get to the next place. Jurassic Park is a great song for working on sustain. I agree. It's funny as a very, very quick story. That song, when Drew asked me to do it for rock class, it was funny because I did an arrangement of it for a friend who walked down the aisle to that theme. And it was kind of funny because I played it so slow that no one really knew what it was except for the bride and groom. A couple people kind of figured it out. But it worked because it's such a beautifully haunting melody when you get the right sustain on it. When those notes just keep ringing, it sounds great. So that's a great example of a song, Jurassic Park. You can probably find that linked in the description below if you want to try working on that song. Connie says, oh yeah, coordinating left and right hand timing is hard. Yeah, it's kind of like doing this, right? It's tricky. But it's always about perspective. It's finding something that works for you. In fact, this analogy or this example people do as hard. Well, if you don't know how to do that, I'll teach you how to do it right now. What it is when this hand comes to the crest of the halfway point of my chest, I'm going to tap my head. And so now I just wait until it comes to that point. And you're probably thinking, why am I teaching you how to do this during a ukulele lesson? Well, it's because I'm just finding a way to communicate it to myself so that I can go through. And it's exactly the same when we're plucking and playing anything on the ukulele. It's finding some sort of relationship. In the case of plucking a string immediately after you play it, you can touch this finger and then touch this and think of it as like almost a little double touch, right? Where it's the first finger comes down, the second one comes to pluck it, right? That might be the way that you think about it. And sometimes when you're finger picking, it could be the right hand that leads, meaning, the right hand will actually come onto the string and then the left hand will come and pluck. And it's kind of this 1, 2, 3 type of motion, right? It just depends. A lot of it depends on the player, on the song, everything else. So finding things that work for you, sticking with them to develop habits so that you can do these sort of things can really help. Connie says, so can you spin your right hand the other way and still tap your head? So I if I do that, I'll probably just, at the halfway point here, do it. There we go. Yeah. The one that really throws me off is this, right? But it's the same sort of thing. You can see that I'm doing it really awkwardly, but it's the same motion, right? It's just finding a place that you can get in sync. So now the last thing that I want to talk about with sustain with this is when we don't need sustain. It's really important to know that sometimes notes don't want to ring into each other. This is especially true when we're playing more melodic sections. Now, harmony we want to sustain while the melody's going on, but sometimes we don't want the melody notes to ring into each other. And the reason for this is pretty simple. If you imagine a vocalist singing a song, they're going to be singing the melody, but they can't sing two notes at the same time, right? It's not possible for a vocalist to sing two notes at the same time, unless you do some like throat singing stuff, but we're not going to go there. So in those cases, we want to make sure that our melody is articulate, so it's like a vocalist, because that might sound more natural. Stylistically speaking, sometimes we want the sustain, that campanella style, that bell-like sound. Sometimes we want it, but sometimes we don't. And it's sort of up to you as the player to decide when you want or don't want that sort of effect. And there's actually a really good instance of this in Toss a Coin to Your Witcher. Because routinely through this arrangement, we have the melody go like this. We have the melody go 2 to 0 to 0 to 2 on the E. And when you hear all these notes ring together, it's a little bit dissonant, isn't it, right? That might be a little bit much for somebody. Personally, I like a little bit of it, but it's not as authentic to more of a voice-like sound. So what I would need to do here is as I play each one of these notes, I'm muting the one that comes before it to be more singular, like a human voice. I'm not muting the harmony notes. That's where it gets tricky, but making sure that the melody is more singular. So if we look at measure 8, for instance, we could play these two. And then when we play the A, and then we play the G and C, I'm going to actually mute the A when I play the G and C because the G is the new melody. So it's... And then I'm going to mute the G and play the A, and then mute the A and play the G, and then mute the G and play the E. Because now I can get that melody more singular. The melody is this, right? And if I play them where they're all ringing into each other, that might not be as preferred. And that's what's so cool, right? Is knowing when you want to use it and not. It's a pretty difficult, pretty advanced, instance of this, but very effective because sometimes we want the notes to ring and sometimes we don't, right? Sometimes we don't want notes that are so close to each other ringing. It sometimes doesn't sound very good. So in this particular case, maybe you want it, maybe you don't. Best thing to do is try to figure out which one you like the sound of more and just be aware of if you're having the notes sustain or not. At the end of the day, the easiest thing to sustain on a ukulele are a G, C, E, and A note being the open strings. They'll ring the longest for us. And you'll notice in Toss a Coin to Your Witcher, I very deliberately did it in the key of E minor because there's so many sequences where I can play these open strings and let them ring for a long time. And I think that's what really makes it work. So, especially in the chorus when you're going with this. Right? With that section there, sort of interesting, that's measure 22 to start the chorus. We talk about sustain sometimes not being good. I think that the E note that's played for tossa, and then goes coin. I think letting that word for toss, that E note, ring actually can sound a little bit bad, right? Because you hear how that ringing E note is too dissonant? It's because of what's happening with the rest of it harmonically. So if I mute that string, toss a coin. So that note stopping ringing, that might sound a little bit better to some people. Some people might like the dissonance. The point is to choose when you're going to sustain the notes, looking at it both harmonically as well as melodically. Zill says open string sustain different amounts of time though. Low G can be overpowering. Absolutely, right? So it's really important that whatever uke you're practicing this sort of next level practice with, you're very comfortable with the strings and the sustain that uke possesses. I'm more of a high G player myself. I do have a low G uke that I use for some lessons. And every time I bring out the low G and start playing, it takes me about a minute or so to really remember just how boomy that low G can be. And so, it absolutely is a different animal depending on the ukulele that you're playing, the tuning, and everything else. So there you have it. That's sustain on a ukulele and what to kind of work on with it. It's a pretty rich concept. We talked about melodic versus harmonic. The melody notes we want to make sure are more prominent and are sustaining while the harmony notes are going on. We also talked about the melody notes we sometimes don't want to sustain into each other, meaning when you play a line of melody notes, you might want those to be more articulate to represent more of a human voice. It's a lot of stuff to work on, but a little bit at a time. If you can get just one little piece of it, the next piece is a little bit easier to work on. So if you guys have any questions, I'm going to be to answering any questions that are here in the chat for this first live lesson of 2020, which is crazy. That's already the second Monday of January. Even crazier that Monday was such a late day. So it's already the 13th or something? Crazy. So let's see if there are any questions here in the chat. I'm also going to go to the Rock Class 101 forums. Every month when we do these live lessons, there's a forum post that has open questions, so I make sure that I answer anything that's asked on those. Looks like the only question is about the piece of music being Toss a Coin to Your Witcher, which was relatively new, just posted on Friday. So had a lot of fun with that. But it looks like we don't have any questions there. So here on YouTube, Zill says, always good lessons, Matt. You're awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for attending. It's funny as I look now with the year being 2020, I started really teaching online lessons, 10 years ago now, which is pretty crazy to think about. And it was actually 8 years ago. I was seeing my memories thing on Facebook that a New York Times did an article about my teaching online, and that I believe was 8 years ago, which blows my mind because so much has happened in those 8 years, and so little had happened in the first two comparatively, but it went by like that. So thank you for attending this lesson and for checking out my different lessons. It's thanks to you guys that I'm able to do this for a living and get a chance to get better with it. The cool thing about teaching is you're always learning, and it's a lot of fun to learn. It's just a good time. So. Well, it looks like there are no other questions here in the live chat, so I'm gonna head out. But as always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave it in a comment down below. I check these YouTube videos when I can to answer any questions that people have, as well as feel free to ping me on the Rock Class 101 message forums anytime as well. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys next month for the next live lesson, as well as the next tutorial that we do here on Rock Class 101. So have a good one. Enjoy playing The Witcher, and make sure that you toss a coin to your Witcher. Take it easy. Have a great one.